We looked at Pactum and we understood that here was a company that embraced AI as a technology, but they had become very focused around a use case. Thinking about the number of suppliers that we would have, several thousand, upwards of 5,000 suppliers at any given point in time. Your ability to service the customer is entirely dependent upon your supplier relations. But you have a large magnitude of these suppliers that we just can't reach. I mean, the number of employees that we have, the amount of time and bandwidth that we're able to use to interact with suppliers and customers is limited. So we saw this as a way to go reach suppliers that we could not reach today. And that was, in fact, what it was able to do. Hi, I'm Andrew Hartley. I'm CIO here at GCG. Just learned today, celebrated my 23rd year here at this company. So GCG, we're a global distribution business. Recently moved into Mexico and to UK and to Ireland. So able to work as a global presence, scaled across the United States with multiple locations, north of 1,000 employees, have really tentacles into three different main areas, so communications, power, and automation, and we sell products in all three of those spaces. We like to say that we make connections possible, and the connections, of course, have a lot to do with our cable-oriented roots, but it's more so than just that. It's understanding connectivity within the business. We're formed by a leadership team with a lot of experience in these industries, and we understand relationships both with the customers and suppliers. And that's really what we do. We connect the supplier to the customer and we understand the role that we play to play value there. So really, as a distributor and anyone who's worked in this business for any amount of time, your ability to service the customer is entirely dependent upon your supplier relations. We don't make products. We take products that other people make. We do various things to them. In the case of cable, we would cut, stripe, dye, add value in different ways, kit products. But it's all the supplier's products. So our line card and our ability to build out those line cards, that's the backbone of our business. So we almost think supplier first, so that we can build a breadth of offering for the customer that makes sense to them. And we build our business by building our supply base. So the discussion around usage of AI, I think, was born out of a peer group at our parent company. So within private equity, there's an interest in leveraging AI. Again, high degree of kind of pent-up enthusiasm, energy, trying to scale projects at various sizes and unsure where to go, spend your resources. So there was an understanding that this is something that we probably would take on. Our CEO, Steve Mossieri, he has always been willing to entertain ideas where we could leverage technology. I mean, he sees the role that we play here as a differentiator. He understands that there are things that we can do that others may not do. And again, I think that there's a kind of collective pride across the leadership group that we will selectively pick, the right lever points and go engage and invest in those areas. Sitting in some of our peer groups, with other CIOs, other technology professionals, really professionals in the commercial part of the business, supply chain organization, everyone collectively has a lot of pent-up energy to go do something with AI. And I think that we were really not that different than the others, but our motivation to get into this space was really born out of the fact that we looked at Pactum and we understood that here was a company that embraced AI as a technology, but they had become very focused around a use case. Because the danger for us was going into this with a lot of general ideas and the understanding that AI could provide something useful to us as a business. I don't think anyone disputes that. Everyone is kind of believing that something is going to become that doesn't exist today, and there's a lot of excitement. But we're in a business that's not a technology business. We sell technology and we leverage technology for the good of our customers. but that's not what the core of our business is. So we have to be very careful about spending money in areas that we don't get a return, understanding where the value is. And I think that the focused nature of Pactum and their usage of AI, that's what really attracted it to us. And it was a small enough bite that we could take, to really start us on our AI journey. Well, I didn't know myself until I first looked at Pactum and I discovered what autonomous negotiations are. It's very self-explanatory, really. It's defining a set of parameters. You have an AI platform which takes these parameters into account, and then your bot, once trained, goes off and performs these negotiations on your behalf with guidelines that you've put in place in this framework, with agreement that you've had vetted through your legal team, and you've come to an internal agreement that this is what you're going to present to your supplier at the end of the negotiation, and then the bot goes off and does its work. And it does this to the tune of 10,000 simultaneous negotiations at once. I mean, it's quite impressive. And again, our motivation here was really to go and to try to address an area in our business that we knew was underserved. So thinking about the number of suppliers that we would have, several thousand, upwards of 5,000 suppliers at any given point in time. Some become more active than others, and some very strategic suppliers. But you have a large magnitude of these suppliers that we just can't reach. I mean, the number of employees that we have, the amount of time and bandwidth that we're able to use to interact with suppliers and customers is limited. So we saw this as a way to go reach suppliers that we could not reach today, and that was, in fact, what it was able to do. We see this as an enhancement, and again, I want to emphasize that this was an underserved area. So we didn't engage the supply team and say, all this work that you're doing today, let's do it a different way. This was simply work that was not being done. So these were questions that weren't being asked. These were offerings that weren't being made. These presented opportunities to suppliers to enhance their business relationship with us. A lot of times there were suppliers that would be, below a strategic threshold, and we in fact just, again, limited by the amount of time you can spend any given day, we weren't touching these suppliers. So we felt almost no internal resistance for this whatsoever, because it was not getting in anyone's backyard as far as the work that they're doing. It was completely accretive. We also chose to be calculating about what suppliers we engaged. We were careful to not engage suppliers that were already strategic in nature, and very specifically that we already had agreements with. So we did a very thorough scouring of our database and made sure that we were taking, out of scope any supplier that already had an agreement. We already had the right arrangements in, but most importantly, that we had already come to terms with them and we had an agreement on paper with them. This was all, you think about it mostly as long tail, but it was a little bit more than just long tail. It was up into some suppliers that by dollar spend could have even been considered strategic, but they weren't being touched. So that was the scope that we engaged. So if you think about our business, we follow 80-20 rules all across the business, and the breadth and depth of the transactions that go on every day. There's a much smaller number of suppliers and customers, frankly, that are responsible for the breadth and depth of transactions. But we're a solution provider. So when our customers come to us, they're not just buying one product or another product. They're buying solutions, and that's what we try to push. So there's a lot of times where they'll buy a core product that may be provided by one of your strategic partners, but they need other things, ancillary products that go with that would not provide them a complete solution unless we sold those. There's a lot of suppliers that fall into that area that they're very important for the overall solution that we're selling, but they're not as high dollar spend, and therefore they don't get the attention by the buyers. There's simply not enough buyers to go around. So the complexity with our suppliers has a lot to do with the terms and the nature of the terms that we've established with those suppliers. Compound that with us being a very acquisitive company, and as you buy companies, they also have a variety of terms and relationships, sometimes with the same suppliers that we're already doing business with. And you may have discount terms on one side, you may have net 45 terms with no discount on the other side. One of the things that we were able to do with this exercise and the engagement with Pactum is really do a little bit of internal housekeeping. So it forced us to go in and sometimes decide what was the more strategic relationship that we had with the supplier, and then decide what information we wanted to feed over to the bot to give it the right framework to go engage, because ultimately we want to be GCG. You know, we're not trying to engage these suppliers as 5, 6, 7 different companies, depending upon the relationship. We're trying to homogenize and get scale and look at this through a GCG lens. So this opportunity was presented to clean up a lot of that data. So while it was not something that the bot directly did, you know, it forced us to go in and reconcile. Our first wave of business was all terms negotiation. And the way we thought about the supply base, again, we kind of rule out anyone that we would deem a strategic supplier, has an existing contract, you know, an existing relationship where we are already touching that supplier, especially a high-touch supplier. So that was the scope of what we were looking at. We're a product-centric business, so all of the contracts were really product-related. And once we have concluded the terms portion of the engagement, then the next phase is going to be rebates, and we're starting that now. So, you know, thinking about it out of a supply base of several thousand suppliers, we have engaged with right around 1,000. And of that 1,000, you know, all were somewhere in the tail or into the middle part of our spend. I hate to just call it tail spend because there were some somewhat larger suppliers that were not really strategic. We weren't reaching them, and we chose to include those. We tried to be as aggressive as we could. And I would say that just right off the bat, I was very much pleasantly surprised with how agreeable people were to interact with a chatbot. You know, not directly related to your question, but it was a thought that I had when we engaged Pactum, was that why would anyone want to do this? And I was a skeptic. Obviously, I'm a believer in the technology. We did it. But I was also not one to think that it was certainly going to work. I just didn't know that people would actually engage. And I was impressed and surprised, pleasantly, that there was a high degree of engagement. And I think that people, you know, have grown more accustomed to these things and cannot overstate how important it is to just reach your supply base. And we weren't doing it. So it wasn't as such that we traded a person that was sitting at a desk for what's now an automated process. This was the contact that they were receiving. They had received none prior to this. So I think that, in my opinion, but I think that that is in large part why it's successful. It's just its ability to reach with density. It was well received, and they felt that they were being engaged with, and really surprising. Sometimes you just ask the questions and you get answers in a favorable way, and you would not expect this. So it was an eye-opener to me that this area needs to be explored in other areas of the business. So we started with this. You know, we're highly interested in doing something more customer-facing. We're looking at some different technologies in that area, but this is how we were able to get started again with this very focused and, you know, specific to a need that made sense to us, this product. We started with Pactum in Q2 of 2023, and within just a few weeks we were up and running, and we saw benefit within the first month. So the number of negotiations that took place and the output of those negotiations within 1 month, we were already north of our investment. And then subsequently, several times over that investment. So, I mean, it's already producing, you know, at a rate that would make this a very favorable project. We ran the terms project through the end of Q4 2023, and I think, you know, as I think about how productive it was and when it was productive. Certainly the first swath was highly productive. And then probably the tail of that one was a little less so. And then there was another surge. We cleaned up some things that needed to be cleaned up anyway. We talked earlier about reconciling terms, so that was one thing, but just good contact information. Do you have a name of a person in the company that you can contact that has authority to be communicated with? It forced us to go into various pockets of knowledge, find the right SMEs for the right business, and to really get an understanding of whether or not the data we have was good enough, to then, use the bot with. So there's a good side exercise that comes out of this, but the Pactum team clearly had a well thought out execution plan. So I think, it was not, we didn't engage in a way where we weren't certain what was going to come next. It was very prescriptive in a good way. And I think that the pain points were already known, no surprises. But I think the ability to focus us on the work at hand, the way they run the project, it has a lot of rigor to it, or we wouldn't have seen the results that we did. Again, the first benefit is you're engaging your supplier. So there are some fringe benefits that come along with that. Now that you have engaged the supplier, sometimes it opens up the door to other communications with other folks that in fact, we're not interested in talking to them prior to these negotiations. So that's one. Direct benefit, working capital improvements. So when you're thinking about improvements in your terms, it's generally always something to do with working capital. And very well thought out, formulaic approach to this. The Pactum folks have, they have thought through how all the different variables, improving a terms, taking a discount, extending terms, not taking the discount. You can go through any combination, permutation of these that you would like. They have this all built into their model. So it makes it very easy to run a variety of scenarios and understand, well, how does this actually improve the working relationship for us, specifically with our capital? Some of the things that we would offer our suppliers would be better positioning in product catalogs, maybe positioning in a product catalog that they weren't positioned in before, website visibility, visibility on some of our portals in areas where we're pushing business, say, with like a punch out scenario or an Ariba or some of the different storefronts that we have where we have kind of a line card of suppliers. We may not realize that those suppliers play in that space until this engagement. So those are things that you precede into the negotiation process so that once the engagement starts, they understand, well, these are some of the things that I benefit from, and then these are some of the things that we would benefit from. I think that just enhancing the relationship overall, the most important thing, because we've had numerous suppliers now where we've had kind of an unveiling of their capabilities, and now we've engaged with them deeper. Again, far greater benefit than the working capital improvements or even the tangible things that we were offering them. And I think getting a stickiness with the supplier. So the value proposition is one thing, but just getting to understand each other better. If you can just go back to thinking about what we are, we're that conduit between the supplier and the customer. And somewhere in the middle of that conduit, we're touching these products, we're adding value, we're doing things to help the supplier move their product through the supply chain. A lot of that can't happen until you understand each other better. So I think just the engagement process alone has provided tremendous benefit that we didn't foresee or even go into this thinking would happen. It was a tremendous side benefit. This AI was very focused. So it's not like we deployed an LLM without an understanding of what it was going to do. It was focused AI. And I don't think that we would have jumped in with the enthusiasm and the seriousness that we did had it not been focused. So when you look at the fear-driven concerns around AI, it makes good sense why they would exist. But I think you're thinking about a less focused deployment. Now you get into areas of compliance. You get into, well, how are we going to make sure that AI understands what its boundaries are? We're basically allowing it to engage with data sets that we don't understand what's in the data sets, and within periods of time that we have no ability to comprehend, it already knows where all of our data is. So when I think about it, you maybe put a little bit more strict compliance lens on, that's an area of concern that we have, to where we need to understand better what our data sets look like before we would be able to leverage AI or an LLM at scale to do undetermined things. And I think that we will continue to have this measured approach where there needs to be some guardrails on AI. And I think as long as it is focused in areas to solve problems that we're not addressing today, I think it's completely accretive and beneficial. I mean, I think that it's not, the pie is not finite. I think that there's a massive amount of opportunity out here, and for companies like ours that are looking for a competitive advantage, or really just an extension of, think about technology and automation or physical product automation, the things that we've been doing for as long as we've been alive. We've been trying to automate and make things better. This is just a continuation of that for me. It's just an automation of an area that seems concerning to us because we don't understand it, and we are concerned about losing control over something that we don't know where the guardrails are. So I think staying focused on areas that are confined, it's important to be able to get the value. So to think more about our, this specific AI use case, this is explainable rules-based AI. This is not your generic LLM. It's based on, the Harvard rules that have a high degree of respect for the end party and what value they're going to achieve with this. So it's a mutual value proposition that's built into this model, and the negotiations all take place with that set of constraints put on top of them. So it was another reason why we were comfortable going down this path, because I knew and understood that it was not going to go out and be the gunslinger, or to do something that we were going to find particularly offensive. We had seen that it worked with some others. We were still certainly early on the adoption curve, but we also had a high degree of confidence because of the explainable rules-based model. So through email, I mean, the negotiations they start over email, and again, it's an area that some work goes into to make sure that when they receive the email, it won't look like it came from someone that they don't trust. So there's some upfront work that we do to let the suppliers know that this is coming, and that's a mutual engagement where Pactum kind of guided us down the path of, well, here's what we need to do. But the letters themselves, we sent them out, so they come from someone the suppliers are familiar with. You set a understanding of what they're about to get. And then really from our side, I mean, to me, it's mostly about pretty straightforward metrics dashboards. Here's how many suppliers we've engaged with. Here's the number that have started a negotiation. Here's the count that have completed a negotiation. In the end of that process, there is a digital contract that's signed. So we were talking earlier about benefits, and I don't think I specifically mentioned this, but this is a big one, is we didn't really have a lot of rigor around our agreements with all suppliers. Remember, we were very focused on a handful and agreements with those, but this forced us to standardize, templatize the way the agreements looked. We had a vetted agreement through, mutually through Pactum and our legal team, supply team, obviously. And now we have this templatized version that at the end of the negotiation, we have a signed contract. So that's sort of the finish of it for them. But from their end, the back and forth dialogue, I would equate it to a good, if you had chatbot experiences that were actually good and useful, and I know there's a lot of bad ones, I would say one that looks useful, that's how it feels to them. Because the questions and the level of engagement, it is not void of information. So we seed the engine and the bot with pieces of information about the supplier. So it already understands how much money they've spent. It understands things about the nature of their payments. it doesn't necessarily go into these areas specifically, but it gives the supplier enough real facts to know that this is not some generic chatbot. And that was impressive to me from the start, and I think it's a large reason why it works, because I have enough factual information to tell me that this is not just the wide net being cast. There's something specific about this. It resonates with the supplier. Clean your data first, would take a lot of the headache out. So there are things that, as great as AI is, it can't read minds yet. So it doesn't know whether or not this person's name that it happens to be communicating with is a position of authority. It's kind of using the guidelines that you gave it. So the areas where we had good data cleanliness and the information was aligned with the spirit of the engagement, so it was a good party name, good contact email, the person was in a position of authority or at least understood how to engage a position of authority, we had the highest success rates by far. You get into the area of data where it's a little tougher to figure out whether or not, because again, we don't know these suppliers as well. These are suppliers that we don't have clearly as strong a relationship with because we don't have good contact information. There we had less success. So the only advice that I would give anyone is, take that very seriously, the cleanup effort, and make sure you understand the very specific things that are necessary. Like, just imagine how the bot needs to go do its work, and you're going to give it good information to work from. It needs a person to talk to. How can it get to this person? And that is the absolute cornerstone piece of information to make it work. And then if you're an acquisitive business like ours, understanding how you're going to work across those lanes where you may have a supplier and the supplier is bifurcated across these different lanes, it may not be as clear how you're going to engage them in one lane as opposed to the other. That's probably the second most unruly problem that we dealt with, because we would have good information about the supplier with one acquired company, less so with another. The spend might be higher with that acquired business than with the one we had better information with. But within that supplier, those two business groups maybe are different and don't talk to each other. So again, it goes back to just data and what you're going to be feeding the bot. As we think about our own business, we're trying to not just look in the common areas to automate. So there are some areas of the business that have been commonplace to automate, be it EDI with suppliers or customers, or figuring out ways to get someone to have an online experience as opposed to an experience at the desk. We want either to be, the right answer depending on the situation, because ultimately, we're a service business. We're a service-oriented company, and if the right answer is to have a person service the customer or interact with the supplier, that's what we're going to gravitate back to. We just want to make sure that those resources, because they become more scarce every day, the level of knowledge and capability that person has to possess to go do their job, I think as things become more complicated around us, it becomes harder to have a knowledgeable person sit in that seat. And we are not interested in becoming a sell everything to everybody company. We sell products that we know our sellers understand, our buyers understand, our suppliers and our customers are in these businesses, they understand them. We're not going to sit in the middle and be, a generic type business. We're going to be a focused business in the right value add marketplaces. And I think that automating areas of our business that takes that kind of work off of people's desks that other things can do, machines can do, the bots can do. I mean, my entire department is really built around that mentality. So we seek automation opportunities in both the back office and the mid office. Clearly, here's one that has shifted over into more of a mid office type function. We're looking for other opportunities now, more customer facing to do similar.